Okay, getting into e-commerce audits. So what is this for and what is this post all about? In short, these are the considerations that any agency, contractor, new employee, advisor, anything like that should be considering when auditing a business as it pertains to paid acquisition, email and SMS, and overall growth strategy of an e-commerce business. So before I get into my main points, just want to reiterate, I say this all the time, there are only two ways to make more money as an e-commerce business. You're either acquiring customers for less, or you're creating post-purchase strategies, offer strategies, etc. to try and make customers worth more to you over time. In this example below, this example has been used many times in the past. It's basically an example business of one that actually loses money in acquisition, spending $105, $116, $111, $90 by month to acquire customers for this amount of first order value derived. But in the months later, they actually recoup that investment. And the reason why I like to push this or remind people of this is because too often people are hyper fixated on acquisition costs, which naturally totally makes sense. You should always be trying to get acquisition costs lowered, but oftentimes they forget that there's arguably an easier path to more profitability on the other end of the equation, which is making customers worth more to you over time. But all that being said, these are some of the core bottlenecks of an e-commerce business. Now, obviously, the whole point of this is just to try to make sure it is understood that when someone is auditing your accounts, they need to kind of understand some other parts of your business in order to be able to give a good insight into if this is something that should actually be done or not. So sometimes for ads / email and SMS, it is as simple as saying, okay, there are good bones here, let's come in and start trying to scale, start testing new offers, angles, creative, copy, audience, bidding strategies, platforms, etc. And all that being said though, there's these other considerations that have to be taken into place. So firstly, the natural economics of the business. Just because you have an ad account that is profitable, maybe you're acquiring customers with 5 or 10% margin after the acquisition costs. If there is currently no product in place to drive return customer revenue or set of products or no strategy, then perhaps maybe it makes sense to come on board, maybe it makes sense to wait a little bit, maybe it makes sense to be a little bit less aggressive, because the reality of the situation is like, even if you get your acquisition CPAs to a point where you're making 15% margins on that acquisition in terms of contribution margin yielded, that's all good and well, but there's potentially an argument to slow things down a bit and make sure there's a roadmap in place for that LTV side. Because if you're solely relying on acquisition, this can be fine. There are plenty of businesses that exist that mainly derive all the value from their customers on that acquisition. It's just there's some downsides in doing so, and sometimes one could consider that a lower probability of success type business. Additionally, there are like total addressable market concerns. So this is less so for smaller companies. This is more so for companies that are already spending $5, $10, $15, $20,000 per day on ads and more, as sometimes this can be an issue. Now, people often underestimate how much you can actually spend on some of these ad platforms. We're lucky as we work and have worked with many clients who spend as much as a few $100s per day, who are just starting out, but also some who have spent tens of thousands of dollars per day on any individual platform. So we have a real strong understanding of this. And the best way to kind of describe it is that whenever you're running any audience, and we'll use Meta as an example, as it's a pixel-based platform, so Facebook and Instagram ads. Let's say I go and target a random demographic inside the entire USA. Whenever I say, hey Meta, go get me conversions, it's not just going to like allocate and display your ads to any random person in that audience. It's going to reference your pixel data, and then from that pixel data, it's going to go and find people in this audience you've given it that look like that initial pixel audience. Basically what this means is that the more you spend, the more likely you are going to be going after prospects who are less alike to the people who are in that initial pixeled audience, which naturally means, and this is very different for every single offer, every single company, but as you scale budgets, your acquisition margin will more than likely go down, / your CPAs / ROAS will become slightly more unfavorable at higher amounts of scale. So whenever we're auditing an account, let's say we're auditing a business that's spending, I don't know, $10,000 a day, and their account has ran very well, and we deem that there's actually not a tremendously obvious opportunity inside of a given ad account. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. Like, you should always be testing and all that good stuff. But maybe the real issue is email and SMS. Maybe email and SMS isn't the thing that's driving enough LTV to make up for that slim margin. Or maybe it's the offer, because if email and SMS has been built out really well, you're doing product-specific post-purchase funnels, collection-specific post-purchase funnels, really healthy campaign segmentation strategy where you're maximizing the revenues here. Well, email and SMS is a great channel to improve LTV, but if your customers fundamentally don't have a great first experience with the product, or maybe there's not a real reason for them to come back and buy more, there's only so much you can do there. On the flip side, another way to combat this is to go after some sort of organic strategy. So if you identify that for whatever reason there is no feasible way for you to increase LTV of a customer you acquire, then the other way you can go about doing it is trying to get them to be really great at referring. That the word of mouth type marketing, which everyone would love to have, but is very hard to achieve. So once again, on the addressable market side, there's always a huge addressable market, but it's partially in context of what you can stomach from an acquisition cost standpoint. And then I've briefly touched on the offer side of things. So naturally, the more offers that you can have that work, the better, as this will provide some amount of diversification. And specifically, and a lot of people don't think about this, in certain businesses, it makes sense to purposefully develop products and offers that are meant for acquisition versus that are meant for LTV/retention. Because some products will be really bad at one and really great at the other, and you don't always have to shoot for home runs on acquisition. A lot of the times, a lot of businesses focus on this, and there are times and places where it makes sense that you should. There are scenarios where you should only be focusing on releasing and creating acquisition-based products, meaning products that you're mainly trying to sell to new prospects. But on the flip side, in certain scenarios, it does make sense to have products that are specifically designed for people who have bought already. And then a few other things as well. So supply chain is obviously one thing, but before you bring on a growth team, you want to make sure that you have a supply chain system that you are confident in, that you can actually grow with. Because if you all of a sudden create invest in a new team member, a consultant, advisor, agency, etc., if you find a winning solution and you want to scale, but your supply chain is the constraint, obviously you've done a lot of the work, but you don't actually have the opportunity to reap the rewards due to some constraints there. And then lastly, financial management. And this is a whole other can of worms, and obviously our job here at Apple Group is not to be financial advisors, but it is evident in working and having worked with a lot of clients that a lot of businesses struggle with this in how they manage things. And the real reason why is that e-commerce businesses can be great cash businesses, but they often are not when trying to scale aggressively. Because let's say you're having very healthy, sustained growth. Obviously, this is going to be an arbitrary number, and perhaps more true for a brand that is doing either 6 figures a year or low 7 figures a year. But let's say you're scaling 30, 40, 50% a month very consistently. Obviously, there's always going to be good months and bad months, but the average for the year is you're scaling 30% a month. If you're only, say, making 10% net margins after all of this, depending on how your supplier terms are on paying for your inventory, it is possible that your top line revenues are growing too fast in relation to your net profits. Meaning you're basically either having to reinvest every single last penny, or even investing money you don't have into maintaining the growth. So that's whenever you start getting into things like, where am I using cash to manage risk? Where am I using different types of financing to purchase inventory, with an understanding of when that payback on the inventory is done, and understanding what is the cost of that financing, what kind of profit do I have to yield. The issue is that specifically for D2C e-commerce, there's a large lack of understanding for a lot of other financial advisors and or accountants, it seems like, in this industry, because it is so new. And this is one area that a lot of people can get or find themselves in some difficulties. So the more education that especially new business owners can have on this side of the business, getting a very strong understanding of fixed costs, variable costs, economies of scale, how they can manage their cash is super, super important. And this is one of the biggest considerations, and oftentimes the most frequent bottleneck we will sometimes see. Just some, obviously there are always going to be other bottlenecks that can occur, but the more that the person who is trying to give growth advice can identify and or understand some of these bottlenecks, it may help them give honest feedback as to what the most logical next steps are. But these are also just some general considerations for any e-commerce store owner or marketing director to consider before or while scaling.